Well, my name is James Bareham. I'm a creative director and creative strategist. My company is my own company. Again, it's called Happicamp. It's a creative consultancy. It was founded in January of 2023 when I was let go from Vox Media in part of the many rounds of layoffs in the media industry these days. But it was interesting for me because Vox Media effectively was the first full-time job I've ever had in my life. I'd been self-employed since I was 21. So looking back on it now, it's kind of like my largest client engagement. I mean, it was a regrettable end, but it was dealt with very well by the company. I totally understand it. And it was an opportunity to go back out on my own again and kind of apply what I'd learned. But that's actually, I'm dived into that. Do you want me to do a shorter one there?
No, you're fine. We can chop it up and stuff like that. And I appreciate you though diving into it because I mean I've been through that in another situation in my life as well. So it's one of those times where there's like we were just talking about with the Robert Frost. I mean, there's two opportunities there. It's the wallowing, the pity of what happened, or it's the finding the opportunity and moving forward and finding your new path. And eventually, and I appreciate you bringing that up because it's difficult for people to be able to when things like that happen, regardless of if it was a good parting or not. It's a departure regardless and nonetheless. So it's good to hear that the moving forward and what you're doing now. And let's talk about Happicamp. I mean, I really find your specific path. The reason I invited you on was what intrigues me is you remind me of a dear friend of mine in the strategic thinking and creative. Now, I say that, and somebody like you might say, well, that's just second nature. Well, it's not for a lot of people. A lot of people can either think strategically or they can think creatively. And a lot of times blending the two together and being creative with a purpose is a whole different idea. So talk a little bit about how you work with your clients today on basically, I look at it as two parallel lines that occasionally intersect when necessary for a project. So kind of, I mean, you'll explain it a lot better than I will, and I'll edit myself out of that part.
Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily will. I think it comes back to let's have some very quick context. It's interesting actually in preparing for today. I look back over my career just to get some dates, just to remind myself of what was I doing when and how did I get here. And it's been I'm older. I've been in this business a very long time. But to kind of specifically answer your question, I was at Vox Media. I was the first creative director at The Verge. I worked on Polygon. I worked for the pre-merger networks. And what was fascinating about Vox Media in general is when I started there, I suddenly realized this was the first time in my entire career where everything I had done, the different skill sets I started as an illustrator. I worked as a photographer for many years, both in sports and studio and advertising and portraits. I got into creative direction with digital, building websites. But up until that point, the creative industry was very much, well, if you've been an illustrator, you can't possibly be a good photographer because photographers just do photography or illustrators just do illustration. When I joined The Verge and worked with Neil back in 2016, it was very much, startup kind of way. But the digital media, I describe it as digital media is a hungry monster in the basement that it just wants content. You'll give it and you go, thank you, give me more. And what I realized is I had to do everything. All of these different skills were combined. And instead of it being a problem, I'd say, oh, we could do something like this. And people go, really? Can we do it now? Can you be in a video? Can we make a video about it? Can we do a feature about it? And it was a completely different, I don't know if it was a different mindset, but it was just a different reality. And it became, that first year, it was 2016, it was just insanity. I mean, it was like whatever you did, it was 90-hour weeks. Yeah. Doing photo shoots in the middle of the night for embargoes the next morning. And it was electric. And I just realized that this siloed strata world we think of creativity is bleeding together. And so I think now coming out of Happicamp, what I was determined to do is I suddenly realized every company is now a media company. We're all we're trying to build audiences online on the same platforms and the same techniques as everybody else. The days of, particularly, I remember the heady days of magazines from the 90s. And, what's fascinating about that, and I explained this to a number of people, the internet has no beginning, middle, and an end. When we create content now, the audience decides how important it is. So if you go back to the magazine days, a cover was more important than a double-page spread. A double-page spread was more important than a single, etc., right? Well, now, and this has happened, this has literally happened. You'll spend a month on a feature, and then just after the feature goes up, you'll hit a quick news thing, which will just blow up. The audience decides that's more important. So what I realized is, well, to engage with an audience or multiple audiences, whereas before you'd shoot a campaign of 7 pictures, which would be used for a year, every ad, everything, same images. Well, now you don't build a brand through an image, you build a brand through images. It's the analogy I've used. It's like creating a flick book. The impression is not the individual images, it's flicking them together. It's creating this ever never-ending stream of content. And if you look at content, if it's, I used to say about, when you're looking at creating content, is how can you build that consistency? I'll give you an example from this. From The Verge is one of the first things, it wasn't the first thing. I suddenly realized we're creating content for the exact reason of, well, only 2 things travel on the internet, words and pictures, which sounds really obvious, but design doesn't. So if you build a website, you have content within it. If you publish that content on LinkedIn, it now looks like LinkedIn. So how we dealt with that is suddenly realized, well, we need stock art. You can't create art fast enough to slow down the newsroom. So we had fantastic talent. Alex Castro joined The Verge. And every week we'd sit down on a Monday and go, what kind of themes, what's going to be in the news? We're running low on Apple stock or Google stock. So Alex would start creating this content that would go into the system, and it would be ready that the writer can just, Google does a thing, publish instantly with content. And then if you would look at, we used to call it do you remember TweetDeck?
Yep.
Do you remember Twitter?
Oh, no, yeah. So context. I was one of the first Facebook groups on Facebook back when I happened to be in college, when you had to have a college email address to be on Facebook.
Oh, right.
So I was.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So 2003 and 2004, I got on Facebook, and I was an early adopter. So full context on my
I'll
end.
say.
In the late 2000s to early 2008 to 2011, I was laughed out of every corporation while I was pitching them on having a social media presence and all this other stuff. And I was laughed out of every boardroom. And then and here we are now. So yeah, full context. Keep going, because I'm with you. Well, I'm with you side by side in those moments, just in a different industry.
No, I mean it's fascinating, right? And it's like, it sounds. I mean, you'll know this, I think. So come back to your specific question, and which I'm answering very badly. No, when I went into Vox Media, I went in as, I would choose a skill, and I would say, I'm going to be a this for now, and all of my work would be based around that. And I'd kind of evolved. And prior to joining Vox Media, and this is the specifics, I actually wrote it down, and I said here, it's kind of my wilderness years from 2012 to 2016 when I joined The Verge, when I could see that the advertising industry, as I'd known it, was collapsing. Mm-hmm. And I remember having a lunch with a great friend of mine, Chris Tagg in Chicago, who runs Defy Bags. He was a creative director on a shoot that we did for a campaign for a year, and he dropped out of advertising to start his own bag company. And it's I always said to him, you didn't change jobs, you just do the same job but for yourself. Mm-hmm. And we were having lunch with the creative director, and he said to me, I remember this, he said, when's it coming back? It's like, when's this recession over? And I'm like, what recession? This isn't a recession. This is a revolution.
Yeah.
And he said to me, he said, but I did everything right. And it's gone. And it was a real revelation to me that I'm terrible at sport. I was a sports photographer, but I have no real interest in sports. Don't follow sports. But one thing I know from sports is if you keep making the same play, don't expect to set a different outcome. And so when I went to The Verge, and it was just a random moment, literally Nilay called me on a Friday night, said, what are you doing next Wednesday? I said, I don't know, I'm free. Said, we're going to the White House. So we went to the White House and we filmed a interview with Michelle Obama in 360 video. And it was amazing, chaos, but amazing. And I realized then that what has changed, a bit like Chris with Defy, he does the same thing. He does it for his own company. I'm doing the same thing. I'm just doing it all at once. And I think that media now is about kind of going all over the place, but let me try and bring this back. I actually said that somebody said, what's the difference between what you do now and what you used to do? And I said, I used to be a plumber. Now I'm an architect who can do his own plumbing. And I think that the fundamental difference is when I started as a photographer, it was really hard. You got it wrong. Mm-hmm. It didn't come out. I mean, it was black. It was unusable. So much of your job was just like, is it going to come out? I still have dreams about film. I still
smell the chemicals.
And people are like, don't you miss shooting in film? And I'm like, are you crazy? Why? The whole thing
to conceive the whole shoot and then not knowing for another week if it's going to be good or not is insane now.
I would never forget flying back from New Zealand from a week shoot with a bag of film going, is this going to come out? Because if it doesn't, I'm done. I'm bankrupt forever. So I think it's to bring it back is, what am I doing now? I realized, go back to that thing, every company is a media company. We're trying to connect and create audiences on the same platforms. So what I'm trying to do is bring editorial storytelling techniques to brands. There's no difference. The audience doesn't care. And today I was talking to a friend of mine from actually an old business partner, a great friend. And I think, the proof of what I'm saying about is people don't care about content is, there's branded content. Back in my day, it was called advertorial. Do you remember the advertorial days? God, they hated us. And I was saying, well, people just want great content. They want to know what it is, but they don't really care. And it's like people talk about, oh, look at this great branded campaign. And you're like, well, the greatest branded content ever made is called Barbie. Mm-hmm. It made $1 billion. It was literally Mattel getting great writers, great performances, great director to make a great film. Nobody gives a shit that it's an ad.
Yep.
So, I mean, there was another great example before. People talk about branded content. You go, the Lego movie. The name of the product is the title. It's about Lego. But nobody cared. So I think that we're in this very different paradigm where content is content. So going back to Happicamp, it's like every company is a media company. People just want great content. And then there's this last really interesting thing that I learned from Jermaine at SB Nation. We were having a discussion about sports, which you'll remember I know nothing about. And Jermaine at SB Nation, part of Vox Media, was saying, well, the difference between millennials and Gen Z is Gen Z follow players, not teams. And I've now realized that's at the cornerstone of everything I'm thinking about, because it's not just sports, it's media.
If you I was the beginning of that age. So like I'm that one that when I was growing up, I had a Reggie White. I had like every single team Reggie White was on and all this other stuff when it was like following the player. And it's interesting you bring this up because I didn't even parallel to these recent conversations we've been having on this podcast, which is the unveiling of authenticity and how we've manufactured authenticity and we manufactured, the brand. And I really like where you're going with the brand because we were masking so much more beauty with just focusing on the brand and not actually what you're saying, which is the people, the engine, the parts, all those things. And that's actually what the consumer wants to see now. And because the consumer wants to connect with the entire process of what they're consuming. And I think that there's such a beauty and opportunity in people like yourselves in the position you're in with creative and strategy where, like, I love the way that you put it with being a revolution. I just have to say, like, that was the best way to package what is going on because this isn't a knee-jerk reaction. This is a complete psychological change in the way we're consuming advertising and marketing. The days of product placement, like you just said, no longer are the days of product placement because they don't need to place it on somebody else's thing. They'll just create their own medium.
100%. And I think it's to go back to your point about authenticity. One of the lessons actually happened at The Verge is I was an advertising photographer. I'd worked in editorial. Yes, I've worked in newspapers. I've done doorstepping. I photographed the aftermath of a bomb. I've done all of those things. But when we were photographing The Verge and I started making, shoots for the Apple thing and a new computer and this, and we looked at it and I suddenly went, it looks like an ad. So we started putting in, be a notebook, and I was really into nolling and arranging neatly, and it was great fun, and it worked. But then we started, and I described the brand of The Verge back then as Real Plus. We're shooting images like our audience would shoot if they had the access, and we're making it real, but just a little bit better. And I think you see that now in advertising, that if you see a shoot that's too good, you don't believe it, or you don't trust it, or you go, oh, that's an ad. And the brands, I mean, how many times have you go on the Instagram and you suddenly like a picture, you go, oh shit, it's they're good. I didn't know. And I think go back to Defy again, one of the things working so closely with Chris over the years when we talk almost every day and ideas and writing. And if you look at the Defy audiences, I said this the other day, he doesn't have customers, he has fans. They love the Defy brand, and it's almost like the bags are the merch, right? And I think it's because ostensibly everything is an ad, it's Defy, but people engage with it because to your point, he's very authentic. It has a style, it has a voice, and people who love it, love it. And I think to your point, I get in the arguments, especially my age. No, I'm 60. I've been in this business since I was 21. And I think the generational thing, you have conversations of, oh, well, the photography isn't as good anymore. And number one, I don't agree. I think it's different. Trust me, there's been bad photography around for a long time. Always will. Creativity, insert bad here for whatever, right? They're a bad example. But I think what I have personally loved about technology, about the change, about those wilderness years, is realizing what has really gone and what that art director was upset about was we've entered a period of massive demarcation. The gatekeepers have lost power, not the creators. It's just the old ways of making things. I mean, this is true. Years ago, I remember nameless client trying to get a meeting with an art director. Didn't get anywhere. So I waited outside the office to randomly bump into him when he came out. And we did. And we went for a drink, But the point was, if he didn't give me the job, the work would never be seen. It was a go, no go situation. Now today, I learned this. You can publish writing on LinkedIn. You can have a Substack. You can go on Medium. You can shoot pictures. And so the emphasis now is not on, we go back to, I used to be a plumber, now I'm an architect. What I think is I've said to, younger people is it's very important. It's not just about being good creatively or good technically. You need a story. You need a voice. You need consistency. So we go back. That's what brands need. They need to know how to be consistent, how to have a voice. And I was fortunate that this is something that amazing writers taught me for 7 years. I mean, I went to that company and the level of talent from people working with video directors who are 20, who their level of capability was just breathtaking. But the interesting thing is, I couldn't teach them to do anything. They were teaching me. But what I did have that was valuable is how to be consistent, how to create a style, how to not randomly, and it goes back to the media industry today. I think is fundamentally, we're the restaurant industry. We serve lunch and dinner every day. So those in New York, it's like, you go to that same restaurant that you like, 3 months, 6 months later, order the same dish and it's the same. And different people made it, but that's the whole thing. So you want that consistency, but you also want the specials. So it's like, we see the brands who they know what they are, they deliver what their audience wants, what that audience expects, but they're also doing things that are exciting, right? You've got to, it is that balance between the two. We have to be realistic.
I love that. You have your core focus. I would compare that to in the U.S., let's say the craft beer industry in the U.S., how they have their core beers. So they have their year-round beers that are there all the time, or on the shelf in the grocery store, the liquor store. Then you have your seasonal beers that go through, and then you have your big bottles and corking cages and all the limited releases. And I think of those tiers are so important to realize in so many aspects of life. Is that there's a way to speak to the masses that everybody's going to capture. And then there's a way and I've only learned this recently, and now she listens to the podcast, so she will make fun of me. My wife is not, she's like Teflon to advertising and marketing. And I'm the kid in the candy store. I'm absorbing it. I am analyzing it. I'm distracted by it. And only until recently, as we've had this conversation about it, I realized that it was the realizing that there are layers to the mass consumption ideas, and then there's other ways to doing this. And that's then what spurred up the idea for this podcast. This podcast isn't a new evolution of concept, like what I told you about, where it's no script, no agenda, or anything like that. Because I found that I was becoming formulaic in the podcast, and as I was listening to my guests doing research, I was listening to them, and then I was thinking, oh, they didn't ask this question, or they didn't ask that question, or they did ask this and crossed it out. And it became so formulaic that I realized that it was against what I was really standing for, which was to get people's story out there. Because back to what you're talking about, telling the story, my biggest thing in my entire career working in the beer industry and food and beverage and specifically has been helping people understand getting their story past their brand. And getting their story, whether it be the financial story, whether it be the family story, whether it be the rags to riches story, or it's the Phoenix rising from the ashes story, whatever that story is, that genuine, authentic story that drove the brand and created the brand, keeping it next to it was so important. And there's a lot of brands I can reference that have kind of been the pioneers of that in certain industries. But at the end of the day, I think COVID really shook that out for a lot of people too. You really saw who was a real brand and who was a real company, and it's allowed people to really get into this focus, like you're saying, about a complete analysis of the consumer journey from beginning to end, and what ways does that individual consumer want to consume the media that's being put in front of them.
I think it's a really interesting point, and I wrote this down because I want to follow on with that with some real specifics. The number one, I did this at Vox Media with the editorial teams. The Verge, Vox.com, about how do we create the brand that is about the brand, right? So The Verge knows what The Verge writes about. What's the Verge brand? What's the Vox.com brand? And it was really interesting. So I created a program, which I still use today with clients, which was like a brand exercise. But the lesson was, branding with journalists is really hard, because you'll say, you're about this. And they'll go, well, technically, no.
That's exactly the line that started our conversation.
Right. So they'll go, technically, no. And they're very smart people. They're much better writers than I am. And the great irony of my life is I'm now more of a writer than anything else. And it was really frustrating or difficult to me. And I spoke to a great friend of mine in San Francisco who is very good at brand. And I was saying about this process, I'm trying to get journalists to think in terms of branding and what they're about, not what they're writing about. And he said, say this: you don't write prose, you write poetry. And this, I've taken that and I change it now. And so what I went back and I said to them, you're journalists, you write words for people to know something. I write words for people to feel something. And so that has now become the core to me, that yes, it sounds pretentious in a way. All branding is pretentious in a way, and that's fine. I'm happy. I'll die on that hill. But what's interesting now, to go to a very specific thing that you just mentioned, what I have found with clients and with brands is often what is most important to them, they don't talk about because they don't think it's important to other people.
That's it.
And so a lot of my job is not to go and say to you, this is what your brand is to answer the right questions so that you're confident enough to say, well, I know what it is. How do we articulate it? And so a lot of that comes down to, why, what is the why and what is the what? And I give an analogy because I'm so bored of hearing brands saying we're a rocket ship. Insert brand has said we're a rocket.
It's so much to the point where ChatGPT now has it as like an emoticon for every single person's thing now.
So I use it in a thing of explaining, the process of thinking, getting people to think about what is the difference between the what and the why and the what. The why is why you do something, and the what is how you deliver on the why. So being a rocket ship is not a brand. It's not a why. A rocket is a bus in space, right? You get from here to there. I'm not decrying how difficult it is to make a rocket, but you get the principle. The brand is we want to go to Mars. The what is we're going to build the best rocket ever made to get there. Now that kind of makes sense, right? It's like saying to you, why do you do the thing? And that's going to be the thing that's going to connect with audiences. Because you might do it in many different ways. There might, unless you're a space company, there's more to just building a rocket, right? And I think it's like one of the other part of the exercises I did, which was just designed as an icebreaker in a room. It was back then when you did things in whiteboards and Post-its. And it was describe your brand in one word. Describe what you do in one word. Describe your brand as an emotion. And what's interesting about that exercise is particularly with a team, they could often all say the same word. When it was a single word, they'd all say the same thing and agree on it. It's about joy, or it's about this, or it's about that. And so it's not that saying, we're going to build a kit that you're going to use. The kit is to help you think. And it's all really, branding is a deconstruction, not a construction, or at least it's sort of deconstruct to then reconstruct. Once you're breaking it down and you get to that thing of, because isn't that all of our personalities? Is the one thing that's closest to us, is the one thing we think is the least interesting to anybody else?
It's also that neurogastronomy and that brand sense idea, that how a brand can touch people in so many different ways. And I think that one thing about that study I also found interesting was looking at it. It proved that we as humans are able to regurgitate a phrase, just like we're able to regurgitate a standardized test for school and when we're growing up in school. But when it comes to actually expressing your feelings and expressing your emotions, we as a society have not trained ourselves to understand how to do that. Therefore, that's a foreign idea. That complete ominous, or not ominous, that omni-absorbency. And I'm making that phrase up in the moment here because I have no other idea.
Do it.
Yeah, is what you're saying is that there's two books that come to mind immediately. One is Starting with Why, and the other one is Brand Sense. And I went down and did a lecture years ago with neurogastronomy and going through the entire sensory analysis and tying your brand to a sense and where you're going with describe your brand with one word. I also would do that with people and clients where it'd be like, describe your brand by a smell. Describe your brand by a feeling of a temperature. Like, what are you, hot or are you cold? And going to that level, like, really allowed people. But where I agree with you and where it's interesting and where I'm hoping with this revolution we're seeing, because honestly, this revolution is more than just advertising. This revolution is, I feel like, a self-acceptance of where we are in life and a real place where we're all shedding the skin of disingenuousness and really being ourselves. And I think it's transcending brands is what I'm trying to say, is that authenticity is being shown with the brands, but I also feel like it's coming through in conversations in a small scale. Obviously, with our world that we're in, it's not happening fast enough, but the small revolution that I'm hoping will follow through with that advertising shift is the civil discourse and the understanding of human connection and the power of human connection.
100%. And I think, one of there's a few things in there. One of them is that this is something I've learned off. One of the greatest experiences of 7 years at Vox Media and what changed me was working with a lot of younger people. And this thing of, I actually went to, I won't say the name because but I went to an agency. It was a salon. They said, would you go to this salon? And I said, I'll go to anything called a salon because it sounds cool as hell. And it was about aging. And it was about marketers speaking to age groups and so on and so forth. And what was interesting in the discussion is it was pretty anti-young people, millennials, Gen Z. Not anti, that's not the right word, but it was like, they don't understand this and they don't understand that. And I remember standing up, and it turned out I was the second oldest person in the room, which was ironic. It's in my 50s at the time. And I said, well, I work with young people every day. And that's not the experience I have at all. I just don't know where you're getting that. I actually think it's completely the reverse. There was nothing but, it's one of the greatest takeaways was working with different age groups, different demographics, underrepresented groups. I mean, that was one of the best experiences of being in an environment like that. But to go back specifically to something that you were saying about sort of kind of how we're getting to articulate ourselves, one of the things that I've learned from younger people is how they tend to be very honest. They tend to be very open. Look at the TikToks we've seen about people who are being let go from companies. I come from a time that even just putting up open to work on your LinkedIn profile would be considered rad, dangerous, risky. And I think it's something I've also learned from journalists is they're very brave to say the things they do, to put themselves out there in the way that they do. But I think in a branding, there is, being in connection with that. But there's another point as well, which I think is less, which is another psychological thing, is human beings inherently distrust things that are easy. If you look at the creative business, look how we discuss it. Look at the language that is used. He works hard. She really strives to do this. That how many stories of artists of all sorts, it's like, the struggles in their career. Now, if you were to hear a story by an amazingly successful artist said, yeah, I woke up got really hammered drunk, couldn't really, watched a bit of TV. Then I sort of splashed this art, and somebody bought it for 10 million. You'd think, you fraud. But why? Now, I'm not saying that one should get drunk and then just splash. And I mean, look, if you can do it,
keep going.
So what I'm saying is we have this inherent distrust of things that are easy. It's like trying to explain to somebody who can't ride a bike how to ride a bike. It's very much like, why can't you ride it? You get on the bike and you ride it. But how that affects us in our career, and as somebody looks back and the dumb shit that I've done, I didn't listen to people to say, well, you should, I remember somebody say, you should do more black and white photography. And I'm like, yeah, but nobody's doing that. They're all doing this. Surely I should be doing this. I didn't listen. And the reason that some things are easy is because you're good at them. Right? And so I think with a brand, either as an individual or as a company, people will sometimes devalue things. Well, of course we do. But that's no big thing. We just do that. You're like, but that's incredible. That's the thing you should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's like how we value how we do things. It's like, I'm not saying it should be, that there is no value to working hard. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying when you're working to your career, if you look for the things that you're good at, right? And it's a very hard thing to do. And it's like it's like ambition, right? I always used to say that the big trouble with ambition is 9 times out of 10 you achieve it, but you don't notice because it's not your ambition anymore.
Because that's the whole point of ambition. It keeps going
right.
Up.
It's like this unobtainable thing. And I remember it's like when I became a photographer, it's like, I want to get something published in a magazine. And then I was like, yeah, but not that magazine. Yeah, but it wasn't, okay. And you know what? It was never enough. And that's okay. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I am saying that you do want to kind of, I think something that I appreciate now is working with creative teams is helping people, I think, to find something they're good at that they love. If you can align those two things. And it's difficult because sometimes we're good at things that we're good at something we don't really want to be good at. We actually want to be good at the thing that's hard.
I felt that way with certain jobs that I was good at. I was like, I could do this forever, but I don't want to do this forever. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
You're stuck in that rut there. And I think it's interesting. The one point you said too about the knowing what you're good at is at a very early age when I was in college, I played rugby and I lived in a house with all my rugby teammates. I also went to Drexel University, which is mainly an engineering school with a big nursing school. And I was there for corporate communications and public relations. So I was the oddball out. But what that turned into was me meeting all these guys and they're still my lifelong friends, godparents, my children, stuff like that. And what helped me understand it was because I grew up thinking, oh, everybody's social, everybody's extroverted, everybody automatically connects. And when they meet two people, they automatically go through an instant Rolodex in their mind and think, when I meet this person and this person tells me what I'm doing, automatically my brain goes, oh, who else do I know that does that or does something? Or who did I talk to recently that needed that? Or what? That's how my brain works. And I always thought it was just normal and natural. And then all of a sudden I go with all these engineers and they're starting to analyze everything. And and then quickly I learned that not everybody does that. And not everybody is like that. Not in a bad way. It's also in a sense that we got to know different parts of the yin and yang of our relationships. And that actually spurred so much civil discourse while we all lived together that I always like joke around that's a utopian society that should exist again somewhere else. It's like, it just, that what I'm trying to say is, I guess, is that open-mindedness of understanding other people and seeing other people and coming back to it while also understanding that you don't have to do things by yourself. So in you're trying to say is, and I'm trying to piggyback on that, is understanding when you start a business. I own my business 100%, always have since 2008. It's the same business. It's called FreeMind. It's an LLC, and it's the same podcast. It's right now, and that was 2008 that I started it.
Wow.
And I've just been keeping it evolving and adapting and pivoting. And I don't say that as some proud thing. I say that in the sense of like, trying to let people know that we need to realize that, like, while I'm still the sole owner of this whole thing, it's also a lot of people that have helped me along the way, and they've served various roles and and to their strengths. And the reason I've always had so much fun working and doing this is because I got to work with people who were also having fun and doing what their strengths were. And I always have like gotten to a place in my career where I wanted that to be every day, all day, because it's one of those things where that feeling, that utopian feeling of everybody's going to the common cause and everybody's doing what they're good at. I'm like, man, that's what, if we listen to each other more and actually hear what each other's strengths are, what each other's passions are, what each other's weaknesses are, what each other aren't disengaged with, and we could start putting the jigsaw puzzle together to people's strengths. It's a utopian idea, but at some scale and some level, it has to bring more joy than harm.
Oh, I agree. And I think it's, when we talk about careers, I think people think careers are linear, but actually they're cyclical. Because you just tend to go through, again, I wrote down the years, and you're like, number one, time goes fast. Number two, it's very cyclical. And, another way I've described this as a thing of, this is the weirdest analogy, but it's very true. When it's interesting you talk about rugby, because my father was into rugby and my brother was into rugby and everybody's into rugby, and I played rugby and I'm not very good at rugby.
I didn't say I was good at it.
Well, the trouble with rugby is when you're not very good at it, you tend to get stomped a lot.
I was good at the other parts of rugby.
Well, what I was good at and what I loved was skateboarding.
Nice. Very nice.
So I got into skateboards and half pipes. And then years later, and talk about cyclical, I was a photographer, and I became the photographer on the windsurfing world tour. I spent 3 years traveling around the world photographing windsurfing, which was good. And I thought, oh, I can skateboard, so I can surf. Wrong. And the analogy, and I found it really useful because I absolutely could not surf. I got destroyed. And the interesting thing is, because when you skateboard, if you're on a half pipe or you're doing it in a pool, it's a solid surface. So you can decide you're going to do a thing, and then you can do a thing. And it's whether you can do the trick or you can't do the trick. If you're Tony Hawk in the half pipe, you can just do twists all day long if you're Tony Hawk. But when you're surfing, the half pipe's moving. So what's interesting that is, and I would watch this and you'd realize the best surfers, they're improvising continuously. They might go up to the lip to do a thing, and then the wave changes, so they have to evolve. And so much of what we're doing is we're surfers, not skateboarders. We have an idea of what our career should be, but we're not on solid ground. Things are changing around us.
I love the way you said that. I really do. I think about I think about how basic that is, but beautiful in its way. It's like you think about any sport, or let's take it to sports, and you think about any sport. Any sport has to evolve from the first 5 plays that were ever like somebody had to conceive that, and then somebody had to outside conceive the variations. And it's like people don't realize that we've been giving leniencies in a lot of things in life, and it's silly to stand our ground and stay with something that wouldn't help us grow or progress in any way.
Well, exactly.
We allowed every leniency in the world in evolution.
Well, I think that that's what's interesting about, bringing it back to a creative career. This was an actual moment I had. I was working with Polygon, and we were going to put up the review for Avengers Endgame. And so the whole thing is everybody gets the same press photos, and they're not that many. So what I would do is I would take them and create a collage like a film poster. So it's the same pictures, but it's unique to Polygon. So it's a collage of all of these characters from the movie. And I was staring at this on a 30-inch monitor using a Wacom, doing all of this. And I suddenly felt exactly like I did in my 20s when I was doing collages with watercolors. And I went, I'm doing the same thing. I'm thinking in exactly the same way. Mm-hmm. The ratios and sizes and how the colors are bleeding and all of this thing. Nothing had changed. And it effectively was, 38 years before. I was just doing it digitally. And it was just that sudden realize, again, that kind of time compression where you're going, nothing's changed, but everything's changed. And so I think about this a lot. It's like, I said to you before that only two things travel on the internet: words and pictures. And I think that's the same of everything, right? If humans were writing 10,000 years ago, they were writing words and they were drawing pictures. And we're still writing words and we're still drawing pictures. And the ways have changed, the technology has changed. So I think it's really important, thinking about a career. We have the conversation around AI right now, and I've soft launched this company, which I don't even know what it is yet, but it's called Made by Humans for Humans, MBF4H. Okay. Because I think that, and it's basically, the premise is, what is creativity in the age of AI? And this is not some sort of Luddite, we hate AI. I think there's a lot about AI. A great friend of mine I grew up with in England, when a musician, we were all in bands when we were young, right? And he went into the music business, but music technology. And a company called G4 Software, they make synthesizers or plugins to emulate great synthesizers like Mellotrons and Prophets and et cetera, et cetera. But he's also got the original instruments, real ones.
Mm-hmm.
And, he works with famous musicians, and now they've been using his software for years. They come and some of them record on the original instruments for the final edit. But the point I'm getting to, I was looking at synthesizers, I was going, when the synthesizers, late 60s, 70s came out, there are musicians who were like, this is the end of music. This is awful.
When like Peter Frampton comes alive, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like that was brains exploding everywhere.
Well, the original Mellotron was real tape of an orchestra, so you could play the sound of an orchestra, and everybody thought it was the stupidest thing in the world until the Beatles use it on Strawberry Fields Forever, or Genesis, or Yes. So my point with AI, I think there's a lot about AI that's like synthesizers. I think it's like, how do we use emulation to create something new? And so that's the discussion. It's not like AI is bad, traditional art is good, or AI is great and traditional art sucks. It's like it's not a monolith, right? We can hold two separate thoughts. I think what's interesting is if we think about AI as a synthesizer, or we think about it like a food mixer, like if a chef uses a food mixer, is that bad? Does that make everything bad? But if you just use the food mixer, that's not going to get you very far. So I think that's this intersection. So it's like, it's going to be very interesting over the years ahead.
My personal take with that, with the ChatGPT, and I've said this a couple times in these episodes, I'm trying to I understand that I'm against the grain with it, but I'm trying to hold on to any analog aspect of it as it is. So with that is the ChatGPT is I look at it and I tell people it's my T89 Texas calculator. I don't have to prove to somebody that I can write a report, but I have to conceptualize what the report needs to be before putting it in there. And I think that on a different way, I think ChatGPT and AI is going to be to the advantage of the creative, because it's actually going to be the administrator that we're not capable of. So it's all the administrative things that are time sucks and distractions from being creative. It takes care of all of that. And that's where I think we're able to, and I could spend a whole afternoon getting existential with you on this, but I really believe that from a creative, and that revolution of creativity is going to come when we let go of the administrative tasks to AI and allow ourselves to fully be present and fully be conscious in our creativity. That focus, I think, is where we go to the next plane of whatever you want to interpret it as.
100%. I mean, the tool is still the tool. And I can remember when Photoshop first came out, photographers going, this is going to destroy photography.
Mm-hmm.
That was, and now it's just like, it's the most normal thing in the world. The tool.
And nobody really looks back at it. The days sitting outside at 1 hour photo, I try to explain it to my children. They're like, wait, you what? I'm like, yeah, sometimes.
Oh, yeah. But I think, and again, we could talk about this a long time, and it would be a good conversation. That I think what is important to me is it's like, it is not a simple answer because we don't know what it is yet. And I think that, but there's another side, and going back to that sort of made by humans for humans idea, in that I think that there's going to be a movement in creativity like organic food.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and that's this basic idea that you can buy an egg or you can buy an organic egg. Ostensibly, it's exactly the same thing. The money you're paying for is the values, how the egg was made, what process went into it. Now, some people who are more discerning than me will say the egg tastes better, but you see where I'm going from. You're ostensibly paying for a value. And so it's not a hope. I actually think this will be a thing, because it goes back to what we were saying earlier. You were saying that younger audiences demand values. Who made this? Who did this? Who is the person in there? And I think it's not that AI will fail because of that. I think that the two will coexist. I think you can have processed food, you can have organic food.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you will be able to buy perfectly usable AI art, or you'll go, well, we want to know who made this. We want it to be unique to us. We want to know that we're supporting a community, or that we value this input. And I think that the people who commission it, or the people who you pay your subscription, it'll be on a website, right? Do you want the base level, or do you want the organic level?
Right, exactly. And that's really, yeah, I mean, that's really what it comes down to, is the hope that it would become an accelerator as opposed to the organizer. You know what I mean? It would be the accelerator of whatever's going on and helping progress move forward, and not to be something that we blindly give ourselves to where we just follow the dodo birds off the cliff, in a sense.
100%. And I think we look at it right now, and I think smarter people than me will say where it's going. And the only thing I do know is what we think AI will be in 3 to 5 years' time. We don't know. Whatever we think is probably not right. I remember we did a video years ago with the technology, and you'll know this because you interview people all the time. Sometimes you have to ask a dumb question to annoy somebody to get a good answer.
You got to poke a little bit.
You have to poke. So I asked this technologist and futurologist this question. I said, what do you think such and such is going to be like in 50 years? And he said, well, what a dumb question. Who knows? Then he said this absolute gem. People overestimate what's going to happen in 10 years and underestimate what's going to happen in 2.
Mm-hmm.
I've never forgotten that.
That's really powerful.
Because it's so true. And I think that the problem with projecting the future is we project what we know. And this is, I think, going back to the other AI thing, and I've said things about AI. The one thing that is true, my understanding of AI, and technologists can join in and tell me if this is wrong, but AI can only look backwards. It cannot look forwards. It can only make creative or practical or informational decisions on something that has happened, that's something that exists. So it cannot imagine. Even its imagination is based upon reality in some way, shape, or form.
It has zero free thought.
It has zero free thought. And there's a fantastic interview in the Financial Times with Ted Chiang, the science fiction short story author who wrote The Story of Your Life, which was turned into Arrival.
Mm-hmm.
And paraphrasing greatly here, but one of the things that hit me, and I was calling everybody, going, listen to this, is genius, just telling everybody. He said, because it's talking about intelligence and imagination, he said it's not intelligent. He said it's a branding issue. It's called artificial intelligence. So people go, ooh, robots and stuff like that. He said if people called it what it actually is, it would be fun. People think completely differently. And he said what it actually is applied statistics.
It's aggregation.
Right. Nobody's going to be frightened of applied statistics robots murdering us, right?
It's an aggregator of what exists. It's not creating anything new. It's just grabbing what exists. It's aggregation.
Which is monumentally clever and monumentally impressive. And so I have this, I have that nerd love of tech. I just love it. I love AI. I love what it can do. But I also see a lot of it and I go, well, AI art's kind of looking AI arty now. And when you use it for writing,
it was about a 3-week period where it was convincible, and then it just went away. And that's the issue, because when it gets in its cycle, it takes a while to get out of its own cycle because it doesn't have free thought. It doesn't realize it's making shitty art.
And I know, and I saw this incredible exchange on Threads. This artist put up this like it was 6 pieces of work. It was really beautiful. I love great art, and I'm in perpetual jealousy of so many artists. And there was this answer to the thread. The guy goes, and I assume it's a guy, says, I love your, because it was 6 pieces. And he goes, I love number 4. What was the prompt? And the guy goes, yeah, no, I painted it. And he's going, no, well, why won't you tell me the prompt? And the guy going, no, I painted it. There wasn't a prompt. He goes, no, you're being an asshole. You're being a dick. Just say what it was. And I was just like, this is incredible. The person literally didn't believe that he created it.
Well, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I mean, that was it. I'll finish with this. I think that I use AI for writing more than I do for art. I use AI art generators. I find fantastic for creating elements, like make me a background, make me a thing, and it's a food processor to me. It makes stuff that I don't have to do. And I find the writing really useful for a quick kind of draft, but I find it very kind of beige. It's just like,
it's not creative. It's not any,
It's particularly the way I need to write it. It's sometimes too literal. It goes back to that. Sometimes you need to break the rules a little bit, but there's no doubt it helps you get there sooner. But I think in creativity, it's like, I said this to somebody, since I dropped out of art school to become an artist, there was a technology that was going to destroy my career. So something's going to destroy my career, but I don't know that it's necessarily going to be AI yet. We'll see.
James, I want to thank you again for your time. I appreciate your time, and any other ways that anybody can connect with you online and reach out to you, LinkedIn or any social media handles with your new venture.
I'm Happicamp everywhere, HAPPI camp, which I've used for years. I'm bento.com, Happicamp, which will take you to most places I am, but writing on LinkedIn mainly. I kind of love LinkedIn. It's like
I've fallen in love with it very, very well in the past 60 to 90 days. I've fallen in love with it. I'm very fresh into loving it.
Yeah, it's the good place. It's sometimes a little bit, everybody's a little overly polite, and I'm ready for that.
We'll stir the pot a little bit putting this on there. All right.
Okay. Well, we'll see.
I'm just kidding. You're good. James, thank you again so much. This is definitely not the last conversation we're going to have. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate you reaching out. Thank you so much.
You take care. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
You looking for a way to grow your business, reach new customers, and increase your sales? If so, you need the FreeMind Group, founded in 2008 and a provider of creative and strategic solutions for the food and beverage industry. Whether you need branding, marketing, product development, or innovation, the FreeMind Group can help you achieve your goals and unleash your potential. Visit our website at thefreemindgroup.com and get a free consultation today. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.